Great by Choice by Jim Collins and Morten T. Hansen. Picture this. It's October 1911, and two teams of explorers are standing at the frozen edge of Antarctica, about to embark on a race to a place no human has ever set foot. The prize? Being the first to reach the South Pole. Leading the first team is Roald Amundsen, a Norwegian explorer who's borderline obsessive about preparation. This guy spent years living with the Inuit people, learning every trick for surviving in brutal cold. His attention to detail is almost neurotic. The second team, led by Robert Falcon Scott, a British Royal Navy officer. He's confident, courageous, and putting his faith in cutting-edge British technology. He's betting big on motor sledges that have never been properly tested in polar conditions. Both men are seasoned explorers, both are incredibly brave, and both are facing the exact same nightmare of an environment. 1,400 miles of Antarctic wilderness where the wind can literally freeze you solid in minutes. One team would crush it, returning home as conquering heroes. The other would reach the pole only to discover their rival's flag already planted there a full month earlier. Heartbroken, they'd turn back, but the advancing winter would catch them. Despite a desperate race for survival, all 5 men would die in the ice. So what made the difference? Why did one team absolutely thrive in chaos while the other was destroyed by it? Was it just dumb luck, bad weather, or something completely different? This question sits at the very heart of the business masterpiece we're diving into today, Great by Choice, by Jim Collins and Morten T. Hansen. After his blockbuster Good to Great sold millions of copies, Collins became obsessed with a new puzzle. In our increasingly chaotic, unpredictable world, why do some companies and leaders navigate the storm brilliantly, while others, facing the exact same conditions, completely sink? To crack this code, he and his team spent 9 years deep in research, studying companies that rose to greatness in the most turbulent industries you can imagine: biotechnology, airlines, computer software. But they weren't looking for your average success stories. They were hunting for what they called 10x companies, the rare few who didn't just survive uncertainty, but actually thrived in it, beating their industry average by more than 10 times. What they discovered will flip your understanding of success on its head. The winners weren't the most innovative, the most visionary, or the biggest risk-takers. They were something else entirely. They were the Amundsens, not the Scotts. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through the secrets they uncovered. This isn't just business theory. It's a philosophy for life. By the time we're done, you'll understand the 3 core behaviors that separate the great from the merely good, and you'll have a blueprint for how you can be great not by chance but by choice. Let's jump back to that frozen Antarctic landscape. For decades, people told the story of Amundsen and Scott as a tale of pure luck. Poor Scott, the tragic hero, just got unlucky with the weather. Amundsen, right place, right time. But Jim Collins is obsessed with data, not mythology. When his research team dug into the historical records, they discovered something fascinating. During the first critical month of their journeys, Amundsen and Scott faced the exact same ratio of good weather days to bad weather days. The environment wasn't the variable. The men themselves were. Amundsen's philosophy was beautifully simple: prepare so intensely that you shrink the role of luck to almost nothing. He studied the Inuit extensively, mastering dog sleds, technology that had been perfected over centuries. He learned to wear loose-fitting furs to prevent sweat, which could freeze and literally kill you. He placed supply depots along his route, marking each one not with a single flag but with 20 black flags stretching for miles so he couldn't possibly miss them. Even in a complete whiteout, he packed enough extra supplies to miss every single depot and still survive. He assumed everything would go wrong and prepared accordingly. Scott, meanwhile, was a romantic gambler. He rejected what he saw as the primitive methods of the Inuit and their dogs. Instead, he bet on ponies, which sweated, got encased in ice, and struggled terribly in snow. He also gambled on those brand-new motor sledges that had never been properly tested. The engines cracked within days. The ponies failed miserably. Scott's team ended up pulling their own sleds by hand through the snow, an agonizing method called man-hauling. When the weather turned nasty, Scott wrote in his journal about his terrible luck. When Amundsen faced even worse conditions, he simply put his head down and kept marching. This contrast between the disciplined preparer and the reactive gambler is the key to everything in Great by Choice. The leaders of wildly successful 10x companies behaved exactly like Amundsen, the leaders of companies that failed or faded. Just like Scott. Here's what surprised Collins and his team. These 10x leaders weren't what you'd expect. They weren't more visionary, more creative, or more charismatic. Sometimes they were actually less so. But they all shared a powerful triad of core behaviors, a kind of secret recipe for success in an uncertain world. These three behaviors are fanatic discipline, empirical creativity, and productive paranoia. Let's break them down, because this is where the real wisdom lives. First up, fanatic discipline. This isn't about being rigid or drowning in bureaucracy. It's about almost obsessive consistency. It's about resisting the pressure of the crowd and sticking to your principles, no matter how tough it gets. Take Peter Lewis, the CEO of Progressive Insurance. During the 1990s, Wall Street was essentially a circus. Stock prices would swing wildly based on whether a company hit the quarterly earnings that analysts had predicted. Everyone played this game. The CEO would quietly tell analysts what the earnings would be. The analysts would predict that exact number. And when the company hit it, everyone celebrated. Lewis thought this was dishonest and lacked discipline. He flat out refused to play along. The result? Progressive stock became a roller coaster. One day it would rocket up 18% because they beat the unpredictable earnings. Next quarter, it would crash 19% because they missed. This volatility made the company a sitting duck for a hostile takeover. It was hugely risky. Most leaders would have caved and just played the game. But Peter Lewis was a 10xer. He refused to compromise his values. Instead, he did something radical. He announced that Progressive would become the first public company to publish its financial statements every single month. This gave analysts real data to work with, freeing Progressive from the prediction game. It required an incredible amount of extra work, a fanatically disciplined solution to stay true to his principles. It was his version of Amundsen, placing 20 flags instead of just one. This fanatic discipline shows up most clearly in what the authors call the 20-mile march. Imagine you decide to walk 3,000 miles across the United States, from California to Maine. You have two options. You could be person A, who commits to marching exactly 20 miles every single day. On beautiful sunny days when you feel amazing and could easily do 40 miles, you hold yourself back and march only 20. On freezing, stormy days when you're exhausted and just want to stay in your tent, you force yourself up and march your 20 miles. Relentless, consistent progress. Now, consider person B. On day one, they're so pumped up they blast out 40 miles. The next day, they're exhausted and it's sweltering, so they take the day off. They wait for perfect conditions, then go all out, and hunker down during bad weather. Who reaches Maine first? Person A, the 20-mile marcher, wins by a landslide. Why? Because their consistency builds strength and reserves, while person B ends up exhausted and exposed when an unexpected storm hits. The 10x companies were all 20-mile marchers. Stryker, a medical device company, set an absolute law for itself: achieve 20% net income growth every single year. Not a goal, not a hope, a law. In boom years, when Wall Street screamed for more aggressive growth, they held back. In recession years, when the industry was struggling, they found a way to hit their 20%. This discipline made them incredibly resilient. Their direct competitor, USSC, was the complete opposite. They chased explosive growth, sometimes growing over 300% in a single year. But when the industry hit a downturn, Their erratic pace had left them completely exposed. They collapsed and were eventually acquired, disappearing forever. They were the person who ran 50 miles one day and got caught in a blizzard the next. Here's the great irony Collins discovered. In a chaotic, fast-changing world, the winners didn't respond with radical, fast change themselves. They imposed their own pace, their own discipline, onto the chaos around them. The 20-mile march builds confidence, reduces the risk of catastrophe, and helps you maintain self-control in an out-of-control environment. That's fanatic discipline. The second 10Xer behavior is empirical creativity. Empirical simply means based on evidence and direct observation. When faced with uncertainty, most people look around for cues. What's the conventional wisdom? What are the experts saying? What's everyone else doing? 10X leaders don't do that. They look directly at the evidence. They're intensely curious and rely on what they can actually prove, not what they think or assume. The best example of this is Andy Grove, the legendary CEO of Intel. In 1994, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. Most people, upon hearing that news, would immediately follow their doctor's advice without question, not Andy Grove. Instead, he went straight to the medical library and started his own research. He read primary scientific papers written by doctors for other doctors. He plotted data from different studies himself. He even tested the tests, sending his blood to multiple labs to see how much the results varied. He became his own expert. What he learned was eye-opening. Even within the medical establishment itself, there was huge disagreement about the best treatment approach. So, armed with his own empirical data, he made a treatment decision that went against the dominant conventional wisdom of the time. He later reflected, "I decided to bet on my own charts." He survived and lived for many more productive years. That's empirical creativity. It's not about being a rebel just for the sake of it. It's about grounding your bold, creative moves in hard evidence. This is how 10Xers make big bets without being reckless gamblers. This leads to one of the most brilliant concepts in the book, fire bullets, then cannonballs. Imagine you're on a ship at sea, and an enemy vessel is approaching. You have limited gunpowder. You could take all your gunpowder, pack it into one massive cannonball, and fire. But what if you miss? You're out of gunpowder. You're defenseless. You're dead. That's an uncalibrated cannonball, a huge bet with no proof it will work. Instead, what if you take a tiny amount of gunpowder and fire a small bullet? It misses. You adjust your aim. You fire another bullet. It gets closer. You fire a third, and ping! It hits the hull. Now you have a calibrated line of sight. Now you take all your remaining gunpowder, load up the cannon, and fire a massive cannonball right along that proven trajectory. Boom! You sink the enemy ship. The 10X companies almost never fired big, uncalibrated cannonballs. They were constantly firing bullets, small, low-cost, low-risk experiments to see what would actually work. Amgen, the 10X biotech company, started by firing bullets at everything: a hepatitis vaccine, a growth hormone for chickens, even bioengineered indigo dye for blue jeans. Most of these bullets hit nothing. But one bullet, a protein called EPO that could treat anemia, showed real promise. They invested a little more. The evidence grew stronger. Once they had empirical proof, once the bullet had clearly hit the target, they went all in. They fired a cannonball. EPO became one of the biggest blockbuster drugs in history. Their comparison company, Genentech, was actually more innovative. They were famous for huge, revolutionary breakthroughs. They were constantly firing uncalibrated cannonballs, but this made them fragile. Some cannonballs hit spectacularly, but others missed just as spectacularly, nearly bankrupting them. Here's a shocking truth the authors discovered. The 10X companies weren't necessarily more innovative than their less successful rivals. The key wasn't innovation alone. It was the ability to scale innovation with discipline. It was marrying creativity with empiricism. It's not about having the best ideas. It's about having the best process for figuring out which ideas are actually the best. Fire bullets, then cannonballs. This brings us to the third and final 10Xer behavior, productive paranoia. Even when everything's going great, especially when everything's going great, 10X leaders remain hypervigilant. They live with a constant assumption that conditions will turn against them at any moment, without warning. They are, in a word, paranoid. But it's productive paranoia because they channel that fear into preparation. Bill Gates was the absolute master of this. In the early 1990s, Microsoft was becoming the most dominant company in its industry. But Gates was terrified. He worried constantly about who the next Bill Gates would be, some kid working in a garage who was about to make Microsoft obsolete. He famously wrote nightmare memos, listing all the threats that could destroy the company. He always insisted that Microsoft maintain enough cash reserves to survive for a full year with zero revenue. His paranoia wasn't just anxiety spiraling out of control. It was a productive force. It drove him to build what the authors call buffers and shock absorbers. It's about creating a margin of safety for the things you cannot predict. This is the principle of leading above the death line. Imagine you're climbing a mountain. There's a line on that mountain, and if you fall below it, you die. It might be a crevasse, or a point of no return where you run out of oxygen. A 10X leader's primary job is to manage their enterprise so they always stay well above that death line. They do this by building extra oxygen canisters, massive cash reserves, conservative balance sheets, and robust contingency plans. When guided expeditions on Mount Everest in 1996 ran into a deadly storm, they were on a one-shot, all-or-nothing summit bid. They didn't have enough oxygen to descend, wait out the storm, and try again. They were operating too close to the death line. But another team on the mountain that day, an IMAX film crew led by David Breshears, had brought enough supplies for multiple summit attempts. They'd built a huge margin of safety. When Breshears sensed the conditions didn't feel right, he made the tough call to turn his team around and descend. Why could he do this? Because he had the extra oxygen. He was leading far above the death line. After the storm passed, his team went back up and successfully completed their mission. The other teams weren't so fortunate. Southwest Airlines did the same thing. For decades, they maintained a fortress-like balance sheet. It seemed, quote, inefficient during good times. But when the September 11th attacks happened, the airline industry plunged into chaos. Other airlines that had been operating with no margin for error went into a tailspin, laying off tens of thousands of employees. Southwest, with its massive cash reserves, didn't lay off a single person. They were actually profitable in the fourth quarter of 2001. Their stock price went up, while others crashed. They had their extra oxygen canisters ready before the storm hit. So we've got fanatic discipline, empirical creativity, and productive paranoia. How do you actually pull all of this together into one coherent operating system? The answer is something Collins calls a SMAC recipe. SMAC stands for specific, methodical, and consistent. A SMAC recipe is a set of durable, crystal clear, concrete operating rules for your company. It's the approach that turns your high-level strategy into a repeatable formula for success. It's not vague values. It's a specific list of what to do and, just as importantly, what not to do. In 1979, Howard Putnam, the CEO of Southwest Airlines, laid out a 10-point SMAC recipe. It included things like: utilize the 737 as our primary aircraft, not just be efficient. Stay out of food services. A clear what not to do. No interlining with other airlines. 10-minute gate turns. This recipe was brilliantly simple and specific. Everyone in the company knew the rules. It provided a clear framework for decisions. And here's the amazing part. Over the next 25 years, a period of massive disruption in the airline industry, that recipe remained about 80% intact. Now remember PSA, the airline that Southwest originally copied in its early days? PSA had the exact same recipe, but when deregulation hit, they panicked. They thought this new, chaotic world required a completely radical new approach. They abandoned their recipe and tried to become more like a traditional airline. They started flying different types of planes, added more services, and moved away from their simple, low-cost model. They lost their discipline, and eventually they were swallowed by a competitor and disappeared. The 10X companies changed their recipes far less than their comparison companies. When faced with a changing world, their first instinct wasn't to change themselves, but to ask, have we lost discipline in following what we know works? Only when the empirical evidence was overwhelming did they cautiously amend their recipe, the way you'd amend a constitution. Which brings us to the final and perhaps most profound question of all: what about luck? After all this talk of discipline and choice, isn't it possible that the 10X companies were just luckier? Maybe Bill Gates was simply in the right place at the right time. Maybe Amgen just got a lucky break in the lab. The research team decided to tackle this question head-on. They went through the entire history of all 14 companies and rigorously cataloged every single significant luck event, both good and bad. The result was a bombshell. The 10X companies were not luckier than the comparison companies. Both groups experienced a similar number of good luck events and a similar number of bad luck events. Luck was not the differentiator. The crucial difference was the return on luck, or ROL. When a 10X company got a stroke of good luck, they recognized it immediately and capitalized on it with ferocious intensity. Think about Bill Gates. Was he lucky to be born at the dawn of the personal computer revolution and have access to a computer in high school? Absolutely. But so were thousands of other people. How many of them dropped out of Harvard, moved to Albuquerque, and worked themselves to exhaustion writing a programming language for a primitive computer kit featured on the cover of Popular Electronics? Gates didn't just get lucky, he extracted a massive return on his luck. On the flip side, when comparison companies got lucky, they often squandered it through poor execution, and when they got hit with bad luck, they tended to crumble. But when a 10Xer got slammed with bad luck, they saw it as a catalyst. They used the adversity to make themselves stronger. They got a great return on bad luck. Progressive Insurance was hit with terrible luck when California voters passed a proposition that crippled the car insurance industry. CEO Peter Lewis called it the best thing that ever happened to this company. Why? Because it forced them to completely reinvent their customer service approach, which ultimately made them vastly more successful. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. That's the mantra of the 10Xer. They understand that while they can't control their luck, they're 100% responsible for their return on luck. And the way you get a high return on luck is by living the principles of the 20-mile march, firing bullets before cannonballs, and leading above the death line. All the concepts in the book are essentially a system for maximizing your return on luck. So what do we actually take away from all this? As I've spent time with the ideas in Great by Choice, what strikes me most is how deeply empowering this message is, especially if you're standing at the beginning of a long journey. We live in a culture that seems to worship circumstance. We celebrate overnight successes. We attribute greatness to genius, talent, or just being in the right place at the right time, to luck. And when things go wrong, it's easy to blame the environment, the system, our bad luck. This book is a powerful antidote to that way of thinking. It argues, with a mountain of solid evidence, that greatness is not a matter of circumstance. Greatness is a matter of conscious choice and discipline. The world is chaotic, it is uncertain, and yes, it is unfair. You will face storms you didn't create and challenges you don't deserve. You will get bad luck. But the question this book leaves us with isn't, what will happen to me, but rather, what will I do? These lessons aren't just for chief executives. They're for anyone who wants to build something meaningful, whether it's a company, a career, a team, or simply a life of purpose. Think about your own life right now. What is your personal 20-mile march? Is it reading 20 pages of a book every day no matter what? Is it practicing an instrument for 30 minutes, even on days you don't feel like it? Consistency builds momentum and, more importantly, it builds self-respect. It proves to yourself that your actions, not your feelings, determine your progress. What bullets can you fire? You don't have to have your whole life figured out. You don't need to fire a cannonball at a career you're not even sure about. Fire some bullets. Join a club. Take an online course in something that sparks your curiosity. Volunteer for a weekend. These are low-cost, low-risk experiments to gather real data about what you love and what you're actually good at. And how are you practicing productive paranoia? This doesn't mean being anxious all the time. It means being prepared. What are your extra oxygen canisters? It could be a small emergency savings fund. It could be learning a practical skill like how to change a tire or cook a healthy meal. It's about building a margin of safety in your life so that when an unexpected event hits, and it will, you have the strength and flexibility to handle it from a position of power, not panic. Ultimately, this book is a call to take responsibility. It's a reminder that the only things we truly control are our own choices, our own actions, and our own discipline. The greatest leaders described in this book, the Amundsens of the world, accepted that they couldn't predict the future, but they also believed, with every fiber of their being, that they could create it. And so can you. That was a summary of Great by Choice by Jim Collins and Morten T. Hansen. We've explored the core principles today, but there's a certain power that comes from reading the stories and diving into the data yourself. A summary can give you the map, but reading the book is like actually taking the journey. It's in the detailed accounts of these leaders' struggles, in the stark contrast between the winners and the losers, that the lessons really sink in and become part of you. This summary is meant to give you a powerful head start. If any of these ideas, the 20-mile march, firing bullets, or getting a high return on luck, have sparked something in you, I encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just an exercise in learning. It's an investment in a mindset that can genuinely shape the way you approach every challenge and opportunity for the rest of your life. The link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know these explorations matter, and it ensures you won't miss our next dive into another life-changing book from the Billionaire's Bookshelf. Let's keep growing together.